Gentleman from South Dakota is now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member. I've got 4 pieces of legislation I'd like to talk to you about today. The first 3 deal with firearms. First off, right now, military spouses are not considered residents to be able to purchase firearms or to transfer them across state lines. I think that's a really unacceptable barrier for our military spouses who clearly don't have the time to establish residency requirements before being considered residents. So the Travelers Gun Rights Act would just make it clear that military spouses have a special opportunity to establish legal residency earlier. We also have a situation where people who travel around the country in RVs are today not allowed to use a post office box for an address for them to be able to access their Second Amendment rights. This bill would also address that. Secondly, I'd like to talk about the Tribal Firearm Access Act. Kind of amazingly, you can use a foreign government's passport as a photo identification to purchase a firearm, but you can't use a tribal ID. These are government-issued IDs. You can use them for all kinds of things across the country. Most states you can use them to vote, but you can't use that tribal ID to secure a firearm. This doesn't in any way cut any of the other limitations on firearm ownership. It doesn't short circuit in any way the checks and balances in the system. It just says that can be your government ID for the purposes of securing a firearm. I commend the act to you. The third piece of firearms legislation is the Tribal Policy Department Parity Act. Right now we have a number of federal firearms restrictions that don't apply to state, local, and federal law enforcement agencies. Of course, they would have a different set of tools at their disposal than others, but that doesn't. Those extra opportunities don't exist for tribal law enforcement agencies. At least not in all cases. Kind of depends on how they're structured. I think that's unfortunate. I think we want to make, and also, by the way, when they purchase firearms, they are subject to additional federal taxes, those firearm stamps that other law enforcement agencies are not hit with. We want to make sure that parity is put in place. All of these bills they're good coalitions, good sponsors. Many of them, we're also working with folks in the Senate. Senator Mark Wayne Mullen has been very helpful on at least 2 of these 3 bills. Again, I commend them to you. The fourth bill I want to talk about deals with the Supreme Court. Last year, we had a number of folks, including a number on this side of this committee, who proposed expanding the Supreme Court by an additional 4 justices. Some of us, myself included, would call that packing the court. It does not in any way increase American confidence in the judiciary. There isn't any sort of a study that says, oh, if you were going to put together the perfect Supreme Court, one that would best function operationally, that special number is 3. Quite to the contrary, you have every Supreme Court justice of which I'm aware who has opined publicly on this has said 9 allows for a proper functioning of the court. No less than Ruth Bader Ginsburg, before her death, Stephen Breyer, have talked about 9 being an effective number, and they have counseled against packing the court. And so my bill would just simply submit for a constitutional amendment that, and it's very simple. Sometimes we deal with 1,000-page bills in this body that it is hard to ascertain what do they really do. This would instead just say the number of justices on the Supreme Court shall be 9. There are 140 sponsors for this. I am most hopeful that this committee can bring this legislation up for action. We have many Americans who are already concerned that the Supreme Court has grown increasingly polarized. Having the size of the court ping-pong up and down on the basis of the last election in an attempt to push some sort of power dynamic politically is not where our country should go. And as a top priority, I would ask this committee to help us keep the 9. And with that, I would yield back or submit myself to questions.
I thank the gentleman. Some common sense Second Amendment provisions, and then some common sense on the Supreme Court. 9 should be fine. It's kind of the way I look at it. So we thank you for your testimony. And I think the committee will kind of hang in recess for a while. We got a few minutes till we got to go to the floor to vote, and we may have a few more members show up, but I think that's probably how